Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar with the Retail Bakers of America. I'm thrilled that you could join us today. My name is Marissa Surdich-Beely, RBA's Education Director. The Retail Bakers of America, if you're not familiar with us, is a national nonprofit trade association that focuses on supporting the success of the baking industry. We are a community of bakers, educators, business owners, cake decorators, and students from across the country. It is our mission to provide a community for idea sharing, networking, and mentorship, as well as support education excellence in the industry. I am very thrilled to have here with us Doris Bozzi with Local Millers today. Local Millers is made up of Joe, Doris, and Isabella Bozzi, who began this business about a year ago out of the desire to make locally grown grains more easily accessible. They work with family farms to then stone mill grains and sell to stores, bakers, restaurants, and direct consumers on the web and at farmers markets. Doris, I am so happy to have you here and to share your story.
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
So as Marissa said, my name is Doris, and I am the owner of Local Millers. And I'll just tell you briefly about why we started, and then I'll get into my little presentation for you today. Um, so, like Marissa said, we began really because we wanted to make local grains easily accessible to people. Um, Over the last 20 years, we've been very involved in getting our food directly from farms. Um, and the farm to table food movement has really grown um, in other areas, but not so much in grains. So, it's easy to get um, eggs from a farm or produce from a farm or honey from a farm, but you don't really think of flour or cornmeal as something to get from a farm. But why not? I mean, those are also crops grown. Um, and so in 2020, when the lockdown started, that's when we really came up with this idea. My husband started baking a lot and looking for local flowers and was having trouble finding any. And so we said, let's do it ourselves. He started doing some research, and we met some different farmers growing grains here in Ohio. Um, and then we bought a mill from Italy that sat in our garage for a year and a half, unused, while we were trying to figure out how to make this work.
What was that process
Um,
like buying a mill from Italy? That I mean, you're new to this scene. Um, how did you go about navigating that?
we had joined actually this craft millers guild um, to learn a little more about what millers do, or like how they got started. And obviously the first thing was we've got to choose a stone mill. There's not a lot of stone mill makers here in the US. In fact, right now there's just one, which is the New American Mill, is the name of the company, New American Stone Mills. They are located in Vermont, and their mill is beautiful. Um, but we chose not to go with it because it is a slower mill and because it's a newer company. Also, we were looking for something a little more established. So Hayden Mills, which is in Texas, they had one of these Italian mills. Partisani is the name of the company. And we had seen it in a video on YouTube, actually. But Hayden Mills also belongs to this Craft Millers Guild. So we had asked them what their thoughts were on it. And it just, it's a sleek machine. It looked like it was very efficient. And they also said it was very efficient. It was easy to clean. And they've been in business, gosh, over 100 years, making stone mills. Um, in Italy, it's still pretty common to find stone ground flour, actually throughout Europe versus here in the US. where it's not that common. But anyhow, so that's how we decided on that. Was we had seen it through the Hayden Mills, um, and then having it shipped here was a whole other
Can
process.
only imagine.
We had to fill out customs paperwork and, but I won't bore you guys with those details. Um, but essentially, yes, we finally got it and it was here. It's a small, we bought their smallest model, um, but it's a workhorse. It can mill about 100 pounds of flour an hour, um, which is about the same volume as a much larger New American mill can mill. Um, all right. I think that's enough intro. Let me jump into our slideshow. All right. So there's our logo. Oh, I actually didn't even mention where we are. So before I move on, we are located outside of Columbus, Ohio. Are you able to see my screen now?
No, not yet.
Okay, let's try. Just did it before.
And then your
There we
website is
go.
localmillers.com if people want to check it out. So,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, www.localmillers.com if people want to check it out. And on the website, we sell smaller packages of flowers, 2 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds. But you can also email me if you click on the contact us if you're interested in purchasing larger quantities. And we do ship all over the US. We actually had a customer, we have a repeat customer in Alaska.
Oh, wow.
She's purchased several times now, which is exciting. All right, I think my screen should be sharing
Yes, we
now.
can see your screen now. Looks great.
All right, fantastic. So I'm going to start by talking just a little bit about wheat. Um, and none of this is meant to be like shaming or criticizing people using modern wheat. I mean, we all, until just a few years ago, we were eating modern wheat varieties and roller milled wheat. But just to kind of bring a little bit of awareness. So, modern grain agriculture focuses on the yield of the grain versus the nutrition. So basically, the varieties have been bred to just grow as much as possible in as small um, of a space as possible. This is high in farm inputs and destructive to the environment. Basically, again, because there's not really a focus on doing necessarily the right thing. It's just like, let's grow as much as possible. Modern grain varieties are bred for industrial baking, industrial farming, industrial milling, meaning just large volumes, and very uniform. This has all happened in just about the last 100 years. The modern wheat and flour system have resulted in a product that is missing the original nutrition and flavor and has negative impacts to local economies and the environment. So I'll explain that in a little bit, but essentially, the way that the wheat is grown now in general is very different than the way it was grown 100 years ago. That's actually true of pretty much all agriculture, not just wheat. And we are looking to kind of go back to the way things were. So this image here is a wheat berry. That's what you call the seed of the wheat plant. And um, you'll see there's three main parts. There's the endosperm, and that is what you get in modern commercially milled flour, is the white starchy portion. There's the wheat germ, and this is the tiniest part of the seed, but it has most of the nutrients. So it's really full of vitamins, minerals, enzymes, antioxidants. In fact, a lot of people take wheat germ as a supplement, um, a health supplement. And I was saying to Marissa before we started the class that my husband and I noticed our skin was getting softer as we started to eat more and more uh, stone ground flour, and we believe it has to do with the wheat germ because of the E vitamins in particular. And then the outer portion of the grain is the bran. Um, Again, a lot of people actually take bran as a supplement. But all of these portions are in the whole wheat berry. And what happens is when you stone mill flour, you crush the entire seed between two stones, and the flour has all the parts. Even when you sift out, we use different kinds of sifters depending on how we want to mill the flour. But even when you sift out a portion of it, you're going to get all three parts of the grain. Whereas modern commercial milling is also called roller milling. They remove all of the bran and all of the germ, and you're left with just the endosperm. The reason for this is to make it more shelf stable. The germ in particular has healthy fats in it, lipids, and those can oxidize. And so really it's best to use the fresh flour within a few months of milling versus the commercially milled flour, which can last really for years because the fat has been removed and you just have the endosperm. All right. Now there are three general wheat types that we work with. And actually, there's really four. I should have added we do work with some regular modern wheat. But the three main types that we work with are ancient grains, heritage grains, and landrace grains. Ancient grains have been unchanged, here it says for hundreds of years, really for thousands of years. We mill three different ancient grains, einkorn, emmer, and spelt. Another ancient grain, actually, never mind. Those are the three that we those are the three that we mill, but there are other ones out there, is all I'm going to say about that. But one thing that we have found is that ancient grains are very highly digestible. So even people not with celiac disease who are actually allergic to gluten, but a lot of people who have sensitivities to gluten are able to eat the ancient grains. And some studies have shown or theorized that it's because of it having a different molecular structure. Our bodies are just more adapted to it because it hasn't changed for thousands of years. Um, Heritage grains or heirloom grains are newer, but they were developed prior to the industrial age. So like late 1800s through like 1930s or so. Um, these are really our most popular grains that we mill these days, and it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's an older variety, um, but they were kind of bred for bread making and for um, like more modern pastries and whatnot. I'm thinking like croissants in France. A lot of these came from Europe. Um, yeah, that's what I'm going to say about the heritage grains for now. And then land race. This is really interesting. These are varieties that are adapted to local growing conditions, meaning this is a more modern wheat, but it was developed not necessarily for volume, but rather for growing well in certain habitats. So we only have one landrace variety that we currently mill, which is the Appalachian hard wheat. It's a white wheat, uh, but it was bred in 2009 in North Carolina, specifically to grow in more humid climates, um, like the Appalachian. So a lot of today's wheat actually comes from out west, where it's just a lot drier. Arizona, mm, North Dakota, those are big wheat states, wheat growing states. Um, so people have this misconception that in the Midwest, you can't get good wheat. Midwest or actually on the East Coast at all. Um, and anyhow, this particular variety was developed specifically to grow well here. It's also pretty popular with our bakers. But what we didn't add here is modern wheat. We do mill a modern red wheat, modern soft red wheat rather. And soft wheats are ideal for like cookies and pancakes, anything that's not yeasted, cupcakes, quick breads. Um, they're lower in protein than the hard wheats. But anyhow, we that's the only modern variety we have. It was bred for volume, like everything I was saying before that I didn't like. But depending on the farm that you get it from, the growing conditions also make a big difference. And we're really not trying to be snobs about the wheat variety. So um, we mill a little bit of everything. All right. So I mentioned it does depend on the farm that you're getting your wheat from. So regardless of what variety of wheat you're using, or really any food, uh, I'm talking about wheat here because that's what we do. We mill wheat. We also mill corn. But really, any food that you're eating, the good food is going to come from good soil. Meaning, if you have healthy soil, then whatever grows in that soil is going to be healthy and it's going to be make better food. Um, this pictured here is Dave Brandt. He sadly passed away last May, but he's been known as the godfather of regenerative agriculture. And we are lucky enough to be partnered with his farm that has been around since 1971. That is the farm where we go and we do our milling. Our milling operation is on the Brandt farm, which acts as a grain hub where other local farmers bring their grain to be cleaned and stored, and then we do the actual milling and selling of it. But anyhow, that's not really what this slide was about. This slide is about regenerative farming. So essentially, what he and other regenerative farmers do or did is they use cover crops and no tilling. to add nutrients to the soil. So rather than tilling the soil, which turns it and destroys the like microbiology in the soil, they just leave it covered with other crops when they are not growing their cash crops. The cover crops will generally be things like sunflowers. I know clover is another flower that they grow. Rye, which is a crop, is also often used as a cover crop. Each one of these um, plants that I'm mentioning adds a different nutrient to the soil. And it was fascinating actually while Dave was still alive. I heard him on the phone one time with a farmer who was just starting to do this cover crop um, practice on their farm. And he was asking about, he was having trouble with something. I think it was low nitrogen. And so then Dave started rattling off different plants. I'm pretty sure one of them was a some sort of radish, like a really deep radish that would add just the right amount of nitrogen to his soil um, to repair it for, I don't remember what crop he was planning to plant next. But anyhow, yeah, so healthy soil, the main things are the cover crop and no tilling. Um, but restores, it's really restoring. That's what regenerative means. And it reduces artificial inputs, reduces water pollution, increases biodiversity, carbon in the soil, soil nutrients, and then it results in higher nutritional content in food. We're actually really excited. There's a young woman who's a student at OSU who just contacted me recently to study the nutrients in our flour. So we make this claim because we've um, just noticed it anecdotally, but she's going to study it and actually show what nutrients are in our flour. So that's exciting.
And I can also only imagine that that translates, on the culinary side of things. Yes, there's higher nutrition, but I can only imagine that translates into flavor as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's on one of my later slides here. But yes, the higher nutrients and just healthier grain is going to make a more flavorful grain. That is 100% true. Which will also result in a more flavorful, I can't speak, flavorful cake or bread or whatever you're making
Mhm.
with it. All right. Just a little more here on the soil. So these two samples are from Dave Brandt's farm. This was what the soil looked like in 1971. This is what it looked like in 2014. I wish I actually had thought to just grab a sample to show you what it looks like now, but you can imagine in 10 years, it's developed even more into this um, rich soil. All right, so now here I've got a little chart comparing the modern roller milling to traditional stone milling. I kind of have already talked well, I talked about the first portion already. So the modern roller mill separates out the parts of the grain with steel rollers. So again, you're left with just the endosperm. The germ is removed and the bran is removed. Whereas with a traditional stone mill, um, the grain is ground between two stones, and then it can be used whole, which is with all three parts um, as a whole wheat flour. Um, we typically sift out just the outer layers of the bran because bakers tend to prefer a flour that doesn't quite have all the bran in there. What one baker explained to me is that bran acts as like little knives cutting into the gluten. And so if you have all the bran in there, you're really gonna have to work hard to kind of stretch that dough. So anyhow, what we what we typically do is we sift out about 20% of the weight of the grain. So like if we mill 100 pounds of grain, we're left with 80 pounds of flour. That 20 pounds that we lose is just the outer portion of the bran. But we do mill to order, and a lot of stone mills will do that. They will mill to order. So I was talking to Marissa beforehand. We have partnered with the um, Farmer Jones Farm or the Chef's Garden.
Mhm.
Um, they grew some grains this last in 2023 and needed somebody to mill it for them. They want to sell a really fine flour, so we used a finer mesh, so a sifter with tiny, tiny, tiny holes, and removed about 60% of the grain. So in other words, 100 pounds of grain resulted in about 40 pounds of flour. That's a much finer flour. That's what they were looking for. And but it also, even when you're removing that much, when you're grinding it with a stone, you're going to get all three parts of the grain. Um, there's just no way to completely sift anything out. And you'll definitely get the endosperm and the germ. There's no way to separate either of those from each other. It's just mainly the bran that gets removed. All right, so uh, but with the modern mill, you can get a much finer, like double O type. Whoops, I just skipped. Let me go back. Whoops. Now
Mhm.
let me go back to the slideshow. It's okay. I'll go. I think I touched on the main points there anyhow. So rather than um, going back to that, I'm just going to move on. So here is really the meat of what I wanted to talk to you all as bakers about, which is this opportunity for you. Um, in other words, why should you think about using stone ground flour? Why should it matter? And also what could you do? So I know before we started milling, I never really thought about what went on before the flour came in my door. But it is something definitely worth thinking about. Where is it coming from? Who is growing it? Um, how is it being processed? So I invite you to think about those things. And the opportunity is to try to incorporate some of these fresher flours into your milling, into your baking. And um, some of the benefits would be increasing human health, more nutrient dense calories from improved agriculture and improved milling. And this really hits hard. Modern society lacks nutrients, not calories. So it's like so many of the foods that we currently eat are just empty of the nutrients that once were in them. Um, we feel pretty strongly about that. I don't know if you have noticed, but a lot of flour that you buy will be enriched. They add vitamins back in, and that's because they've removed the vitamins that naturally were in the flour. It's a little bit silly if you ask me. But again, it's not just flour. This is true in general about a lot of foods that we eat. Um, all right, so you have the opportunity to increase health, decrease the environmental impact. Um, I am not really an expert on this, but I do know what I showed you before, whereas the soil health affects the food grown in it, but also it helps with water retention. I did see this with my own eyes. A few weeks ago, we were having a lot of flooding in Ohio, but the farm where we go to mill, their fields were not like a giant lake like I saw some other fields. And it's because healthier soil can absorb the water better. Um, so anyhow, it's just an opportunity. If you know the farm that your food is coming from, you can support those that are um, helping the environment versus being detrimental to it. Um, all right, the next point is building local opportunities and community. Again, it's like if helping your neighbor, you know, farms that are near you helps the whole community. And then the fourth point, improving the food system resiliency. Current grain system is consolidated and homogenized. Again, um, I think, I don't know if I removed the slide that had this point or if it's coming up next, but something like 40% of all flour sold in the US is under one company, and then the another company does sells the other like 30% or another 30%. Um, so it's really consolidated. Once upon a time, about 100 years ago, every town had its own mill, and so you'd be eating grain that was grown, right there. And then there's also the opportunity to rediscover lost skills. So we're rediscovering the skill of milling. We are really encouraging bakers to rediscover the skill of baking with local ingredients. All right. Now, here I touch on kind of the process. It's going to take research and development and collaboration um, if you want to incorporate these locally grown stone ground flours into your bakery. But the end result would be you're going to find it to be more flavorful and just really better texture to better nutrition, like I've said a bunch of times. Um, but it's going to take, like I said, research and development, adjusting your hydration, adjusting your mixing and fermentation times if you're making breads. Um, and point number 3 here, mixing with commercial, using alone, or doing both. This is refers to we've been in business for a year now, and um, talked to we've talked to a lot of bakers, and um, an issue that a lot of them have with trying to incorporate our flours is how do I do this? It's, flour is the main ingredient in what I'm making, and I can't just switch to something that behaves completely differently. Um, and so what some of our customers slash bakers have done is they mix our flour with their commercial flour that they're used to, starting with very small percentages. Yawning Bear Bread is a bread company here in Columbus. They started with just like 10% of their sourdough bread, like flour amount, was one of our hard red flours, and then the other 90% was commercial. And they've incrementally increased that over the last year to where now um, it's, I think in most of their sourdough breads, they're doing about 60% our flour, and then 40% is still King Arthur. Um, but their goal is to eventually increase all the way to 100%. local stone milled flour. It's a slow process because the baker has to get used to using the flour. It behaves differently because it's fresh and because it's milled differently. But then B, the consumer has to get used to it as well. Um, so that's what Yawning Bear Bread has been doing. We also have another baker who has been mixing with commercial as well, but they jumped kind of straight into um, like 80% right away. Um, Again, it's another sourdough baker, and he just is adjusting as he goes. Some breads he makes with a lower percentage, some with a higher, but he started right away with a very high percent of our flour. Um, we've got another baker in Cleveland who is in the R&D um, phase right now, and uh, his plan was to use our flour alone, but in only one of his products at the bakery. So all the other bakeries would be, I mean, all the other baked goods would still be made the same way that he's always made them. But he's going to have a focaccia that's a local grain focaccia. So that's another way to do it. So you develop a recipe from the get go using local stone milled flour um, versus commercial.
You know, Doris, you talked about this R&D portion, and I think it's a really exciting kind of new frontier in baking when you talk about it. And I look at all the different grain varieties that some bakers might not even be familiar with, like the einkorn, the ancient grains, things like that. And to me, it offers this kind of playground of new flavors for bakers to see and work with, um, and start developing products that are very unique. Especially if
Yeah.
it's not just a one for one swap out, right, with whatever you're using. I think bakers are so used to just having a product and they know they use high gluten or they use bread flour or cake flour or whatever it might be for a certain application. And now it's almost the opposite. Like you have this opportunity to create products that cater to the grain. So it's almost a reverse way of
Yeah.
thinking, you know?
Yes, yes. I'm so glad that you said that because that's exactly what we're trying to convey here
Yeah.
is that instead of like a one size fits all, like homogeneous product, yeah, the different grains each behave differently and have different flavor profiles, almost like different wines, have different profiles based on the grape, but even the same grape grown like in one grown in California versus grown in France,
Hmm.
that same grape is still going to taste slightly different
Right.
um, when it's made into wine. The same principle applies here with the different grains and even the different places where they're grown. In fact, actually, we right now are milling two different Rouge de Bordeaux grains, one grown here in Ohio. And Rouge de Bordeaux is a heritage grain, so it's been around since the 1800s. It originated in the Bordeaux region of France. Um, but anyhow, we have grain that was grown here in Chillicothe, Ohio, about a half hour away from me. That's Rouge de Bordeaux. And then we also have a Rouge de Bordeaux that we are playing around with actually from North Dakota. And even though they're both grown on regenerative farms, um, actually, in fact, from the very same seed, because the two farms shared the seed this year, the flavor is slightly different between the two, and the protein percentage is different. So the Rouge de Bordeaux that we have from North Dakota is 13.5% protein. The one that we have from here is about 12% protein. Again, goes back to the difference in growing climates, really.
That's a great
Um,
point, with the concept of wine. I think people are really good and used to thinking about wine and regionality and that concept of like terroir or the flavor of place, right?
Right.
Where bread that's been lost because of that, industrialized process that we've been accustomed to for so long. But what an exciting concept for bakers in a certain locality to be able to highlight flavor of place through their grains and their bread that they're producing. I think that's just a really exciting movement and opportunity for bakers, especially, if you're a retail baker and you're in a place, you're making bread locally, and then to add that layer of using a local grain is such an exciting movement.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. And, yeah, I think it's just great to be able to tell that story
Mhm.
too. Like, this grain was grown, 15 miles down the road,
Right.
and then it was milled 15 miles down the road,
Yeah, we haven't
and now
even
here it
touched
is.
on the marketability aspect of it, right? Like I think as a business person, that's one thing that can set you apart from other bakeries, and it's
Yes,
something that could be highly marketable as a business.
exactly, and I think we're just at the, beginning of this
Mhm.
movement. Also similar to, like, the craft beer movement, you know, I can remember when I was graduating from college, and I'm dating myself here a bit, but, that's when it kind of started, but there was, like, Sam Adams and, um well, I'm from Boston, so Sam Adams was the first microbrewery, and now it's like a giant thing,
Mhm.
um, but, there were only a handful of breweries kind of competing with the giant Budweisers and Coors of the world.
Mhm.
But look around now, like, everywhere you go, there's a new microbrewery. I feel like we are at the same kind of point right now with the green movement. Um, I mean, I don't know if every single town is gonna have a mill in 30 years, um, but I do think that people are starting to pay attention to this, and it really would, um, set your bakery apart, if you're using local grains. Um, and that's just exciting.
Mhm.
That's just exciting. I think it's, I was also saying to Marissa, a miller that I know that started back in 2010, she said that when she started, there were only like 10 mills that she could find in the whole country. Now there's about 100, which is still nothing. it's, but it's a lot more, but it's still nothing. And Um, so, it's an exciting time for us as millers, but I think also we want to partner with bakers who are excited about using local ingredients for the flavor, for the nutrition, to help the environment, but also it is very marketable is what I'm trying to get at. Like it's new and exciting and I think it's gonna grow. I just looked at the time, it's already 1:45. Rather than I don't know that I had much else in my slideshow that was really, um, important, and it will be shared. I'd rather open up to any questions if people have them. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm just looking to see if there's anything really important that I wanted to touch on. Just sharing these photos. I really love this one where you can see our Lydia, she's one of the farmers that we partner with. This is also exciting. A lot of the regenerative farmers are younger um, farmers, and really, she's the only female one that I've met so far. But there is a trend in more female farmers. Um, Now too, which is exciting. But sadly, the average age of a farmer in the US right now, I think I read was 70
Wow.
years old. um, but with the regenerative movement, they it's like the younger generation is getting excited about growing in a way that is meaningful. but also more profitable. So they can sell their products for higher prices because they're doing things, you know, differently, kind of like organic was about 20 years ago. That's what regenerative is now. And then this is our baker friend, Anson, with one of his breads. He's the one that I said jumped right into about 80% using local flours in his recipes. And that was initially. Now he kind of experiments all over the place. He sometimes will make breads with just a small percentage, sometimes with a huge 100%. But anyhow, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for any questions.
Doris, you had mentioned pricing, because I imagine with, using the local grains right now anyway, it does increase food crop cost somewhat. Have you heard how your bakers that are using your grains have handled that in a retail setting at all?
I'm
Like,
sorry, the
sorry,
connection is kind of not that great.
that's
So
okay. I'll
I
say it
got that you're
again.
asking about pricing,
Pricing,
but
yeah.
ask again.
With pricing, obviously, I think using the local grains, it increases your food costs a little bit as a local
Oh,
retailer. How have you heard, your customers that are selling their breads, how have they handled that in terms of increasing their bread prices and how that's um, gone over with customers? Do you
that's a
find,
great
have you heard that
question.
customers kind of appreciate the value of what they're receiving?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So a couple of things. One is, yes, I've heard from bakers who say we've had to increase our price a little bit, but it has not been an issue because of customers really appreciating that it is a local product.
Mhm.
Um, not just locally baked, but actually locally grown. Uh, but the other thing that I've heard that was interesting is a baker who said the local grains have actually been a little more inflation proof than like he was saying that as the flat price for other flour has been going up, the prices for local flour has stayed kind of the same. So while it's still higher, I mean, I'm not going to lie, our 50-pound bag of like a bread flour is going to be $60.
Mhm.
Whereas I know in King Arthur you can get it for like $35. Um, but it's remained the same. I mean, we've only been in business for a year, but if you go like a few years back to other mills, other stone mills, the prices pretty much stayed the same, even as other prices are going up. So that was an interesting
That's a really
perspective.
interesting point about when you're buying locally, you are a little more insulated from inflation, things like that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have recommendations? Because our members are everywhere, you of course are in Ohio. Um, so local Ohio bakers can get in touch with you. I know you ship, but do you have recommendations for bakers and in different states and how they can get in touch? How do they connect with
Yeah,
local
that's a great.
millers or farmers? How do you start this process of researching?
So we belong to a group called the Artisan Grain Collaborative, and it's a free group to join. So anybody who uses artisan grains can join, but it tries to connect the different parts of the grain chain. So from farmer to miller to then food producer or beverage producer. So they have like brewers and distillers in the group also, but they have bakers in the group, millers in the group. That group is mainly like Midwestern,
Mhm.
but there's a similar group on the East Coast called the Common Grain Alliance. And again, it's a group of people who are from the different portions of the grain chain. So um, growers, millers, and then food or drink producers. So those are two places that I would start. Uh, Also, just Google search millers near me. I mean, that's kind of how we discovered that there weren't a lot of millers near us.
Yeah.
But
Did you say
we
there's about 100? 100 that are
there's
doing
about 100 in the whole country. Yeah.
oh, yeah, a small number of you. You're part of a very elite
Um,
group.
I can tell you, yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I can list off a few other millers in the States if people are
Yeah.
curious, but
I think that's a great place to start though, with those two organizations.
yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And then your website one more is localmillers.com, correct?
Yes,
And they can get in touch with
localmillers.com.
you. Retail bakers are able to kind of custom order if they need to.
Yes, and we are happy to mill specifically to your specifications. In other words, if you wanted, I mean, we can do custom orders as far as volume, but also as far as the like amount of bran that is retained in the flour. So you can play around and try different things. Really, part of our mission too is to help bakers to use the flour. So um, we encourage questions. You know, I personally am not, that's not true. I am a baker. I sell I bake biscotti, which I sell in several stores now. So I am a baker, but I'm not a baker by trade. It's something that I've gotten into just in this last year with the milling. Um, but we do, my husband has a lot of different things, and we have a network now of other bakers that have been using our flours. So whenever people encounter any issues, email me, email us, and we'll find an answer and we'll like talk you through, oh, have you tried increasing your hydration? Because bran is very thirsty, you know, things like that.
Great. And if anyone, wants to reach out for everyone that registered for the event, I can send out the email information and more information about local millers. Um, Everyone just keep an look on the RBA website as well. This webinar will be available there and for everyone to review. And check out the events tab for other upcoming RBA events, retailbakersofamerica.org. Check out the events tab. We have a lot of other good webinars and in-person events coming up. Doris, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your wealth of information about different types of grains, the milling process, and all of that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was really exciting. Again, really, the big takeaway point that I want everyone to have is just don't be afraid to try. um, don't be afraid to try new things, and just let's keep this conversation going. Um, Farmers, millers, bakers, we really should all be working together. Um, Teamwork makes the dream work.
Love it. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.